In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Okay, you've got that. If you want to memorize the rest of the Bible, you're off to a great start. That's all it takes. We're going to keep going. In the beginning, God created this thing and that thing and that thing and this thing. And then on the second page, who shows up? Adam and Eve. Okay, we're on a roll. Some of you are like, I know this answer, but it's probably a trick question. No, we're going to in this space, they're all easy questions, yeah? In Bible study, they're trick questions. Okay, so Adam and Eve are just doing their thing, dancing around naked in the garden, which makes it more interesting to memorize when you have things like that, and until they eat fruit from the tree of knowing too much for your own good. That's my favorite translation anyone ever gave to me. It's getting by the tree of the knowledge of the tree of knowing too much for your own good. It doesn't go well for them. And whether you're the kind of person who thinks this story is sort of a historical account, or whether you think this is a deeper story about humankind's insatiable desire for more and more and more, that's how the Bible gets cooking. First 2 pages. And then, like, you can skip a few thousand pages there. Go through the valley of the shadow, like many of you have memorized that one. There's a lot of smiting. No one wants to memorize that. The Jesus stuff is pretty cool. And you go all the way to the end. Last chapter of the last book, Revelation. How would you describe, what are some words? Just like yell out some words to describe Revelation. Fire, awful. Hopeful. Okay, I thought God had a bad marketing plan there, but Lynn saved us all. Hopeful was what that was. Right there on the last page of Revelation is another tree. A tree that heals all things. And it lists a couple. It's poetic. So it heals the nations. It heals our tears. It heals our pain. It heals our insatiable desire for more and more and more. And whether you think that is a real history coming story, like that's going to happen tomorrow or the next day or sometime, or whether you think that is a God's deeper dream for us always, what we see across these pages, from creation to new creation, from the eternal now to the eternal hope, it's tree and tree, like 2 towers holding all of life and love in this open clearing. These trees of life stand as a symbol of holy stability and presence and protection for everywhere we are and for all the peace that we're made for. So a tree of life, by the way, we're going to learn some Hebrew today. A tree of life, the Hebrew word for that is hayetz. Hay is the Hebrew word for life, and etz is for one tree. So tree of life is hayetz. Let's say that together. Hayetz. You don't get to do the cool thing on this one, but it's a fun word. And through the next several weeks, we're going to look at many stories of hayetzim, that's trees of life, throughout all the Bible. We are going to start today not on page 1 or 2. You know something about that story already. We're going to start in the Psalms. And we're going to try to be with God's good news as it shines through those leaves and offers some dappled truth into your life. And that's my prayer for you over these next 6 weeks, that whatever shade in your life covers you with gloom or with comfort, whatever knots in your life feel painful or wise, whatever branches seem ominous or inviting, my prayer is that God's good news will find its way into your heart, that your branches reach toward healing as God's branches reach toward truth and grace. So Psalm 104, it's what Mark read, parts of that, it is a classic Hebrew song of celebration. If we were in church 3,000 years ago and they were singing this song, because they sing these, they don't just read them, this is the song where Kayla's hands are up in the air. This is, if you're like at some Jewish wedding 3,000 years ago and they put this song on, someone's over saying, this is my jam, and they just run out to the dance floor. This is one of those songs. It has a rhythm to it. When you read the whole thing, if it's translated right, you see it kind of starts with the same word for a whole paragraph and then starts with the same word for a paragraph. So there's something almost EDM about it, because it's just pulsing about God's creation. I couldn't find an EDM song about God's creation, but I can't compare it to that. But the point that God it says God's world is amazing. It looks to the skies, it looks to the waters, it looks to the farms, it looks to the wild mountains. It looks to the wildest animals and to the most domestic people and says, we are all in this together. When we wake up to go to work every day, we are still part of this beautiful creation. It says, it mimics page 1 of the Bible. It says, all those things are good, but when you put it together, it's really good. And smack in the middle of that psalm, if you were to just like measure it out, right in the middle, kind of like an apex, is verse 16, and Mark read it for us. The trees of the Lord are well cared for. It says the olive trees and the trees that give us food cared for. The cedar trees and the trees that give us wood cared for. The trees that give birds nests and the trees that give us wonder cared for. It says the trees are well cared for, which raises the question, now, 3,000 years later, after the song is said at least, are our trees today still so well cared for? Are the trees in our valley in Salt Lake, are they healthy? Do they contribute to the birds and the animals and the air and the soil? Do they contribute to our mental and our spiritual well-being? Now, back in high school, I didn't pay attention to many things. I don't think I paid attention to this while it was happening, but one summer I got a job with my dad working at a sawmill. That's where you cut trees down and you cut them. It was hard work. I was carrying logs. The saw was as big as me. It was a huge saw, and you're standing right by it. It was terrifying. My hands got really nice and rough because they had splinters in them all the time. I learned from that process, from tearing the trees out of the ground, to cutting them into lumber, to stacking them, to moving the saw, the whole thing. I learned that there are ways to harvest trees sustainably, but we don't usually do it. We don't do it. It costs too much. I would learn later that there's almost always ways to care for creation sustainably, to care for the land and the water and the air, but it's too expensive. Caring for our world, it seems, takes too much money and too much time. It is too much of an assault on the gospel of profit at all cost. It sounds weirder and weirder to me when the cost comes closer and closer to ending our civilization as we know it, but that's the deal we humans have seemed to make. Now, after high school, in college and grad school, I took to climbing trees. Great place to read, climbing tree. If you're ever, you're just tired of all the bustle, just get a few hundred feet in the air. It's why I climb rocks now, way up there. I don't get to have any of the concerns. Same thing in grad school. I'd climb trees. There were 2 really huge pine trees in Fayetteville, Arkansas, just sitting outside the old main building. Every campus has an old main building. It's usually one of the busiest places. So I'd go climb up there 50, 60, 80 feet. I'd bring Immanuel Kant in my back pocket, and I'd read Immanuel Kant in a tree. You shouldn't read Immanuel Kant anywhere like that. It takes too much. You shouldn't read Immanuel Kant, but it's what it is. I was above the library, so I could kind of see out into the world there, nestled in my branch. No one would bug me. This is before cell phones. No one would bug me, except the time the police caught me. Not the only time the police caught me, but these campus police, they bring me down. They had nothing to charge me with, but they gave me that "do not do this again, young man" thing. It's really bad when you get to the age where you do that to somebody. It really is like turns the tides on things, but it felt what it felt. Do you think I obeyed them? No, I kept climbing trees. I still climb trees. I had sawn trees down. I worked for the Forest Service. I bucked trees and moved them. Then the next summer would get a job as a tree trimmer, and I'd put on those belts and climb up the trees with a chainsaw dangling beside me and cut things down. I mean, I was a tree guy, but it was these trees where I had an intimate relationship, just climbing them over and over every week, getting to know them, getting to know where the sap was, where I could move away, where I could take care, where I could take risks. I'm sure some of you are close to trees in ways. Some of you go down to see the apple blossoms at the Capitol every time that they come in bloom, and you just feel somehow closer to them. They make this place feel a little more home when you see those same trees bloom over and over. Some of you have trees in your own yard. I'll bet some of you here even have named a tree in your own yard, and you see it grow. You take care of it even more and more. Many of you know what it's like to care about a tree or a forest or a mountain, even as our society moves so far away from caring for trees in general. Wangari Maathai cared about trees, and she learned to care for trees. Wangari is one of the great voices in all of history to help us learn that heart skill of caring. Wangari was one of the first Kenyans to come to America to study. She earned a bachelor's of science and then a master's in biology. She went back to Nairobi to teach zoology, and eventually she became the first African woman, period, to earn a PhD. First African woman to earn a PhD. And many years later, she'd win a Nobel Prize for empowering women to plant trees. That was her life, her study, her passion. She would invite communities to plant trees that would create more firewood and animal habitat, and it would protect farms, which would help people, save time and eat better. She'd help people to save just energy, and they'd live better and love more. And she started all of this by realizing that trees are on our side. Before she died just a few years ago, she's a great storyteller in addition to being a great scientist, and she told a story about her grandmother. And grandmother Maathai would tell Wangari, never cut down this one kind of tree. It's not for firewood. This is a sacred tree. It's a tree of God. And Wangari obeyed. She never harmed, she never hurt those sacred trees. And in those villages, life hung together well. The gods were smiling on them. And it really seemed like when you respected those trees, they answered your prayers. But then, her grandmother tells, Christian evangelists came to save the heathens. It's never gone well. Still, it doesn't go well. And to save the heathens, the Christians needed churches, and to build churches, they needed wood, and to make lumber, they had to chop down trees. And of course, things began to fall apart. Grandmother said things fell apart because the gods were angry. The local healers said things were falling apart because people were punished for letting the trees be cut down. And the old people cried, and many people starved, and communities struggled, and farmers fought against each other for now more difficult land. And some people went to the churches for help, sure. But the animals disappeared, and the crops failed, and children went hungry. Anyone who could move away, they moved away. Well, this is why Wangari moved away, and why she went to college, to learn about trees, to learn about ecology. And eventually she realized that those sacred trees, far from any magical quality, or maybe this is the magical quality they had just extremely deep and extensive roots. Roots that were deeper than other trees. I don't know how far some trees' roots go, but these were really far, and those deep roots protected soil erosion, and they maintained soil quality, and they kept the deserts from encroaching, and they encouraged biodiversity, and they nested birds that would eat the bad bugs that would eat the plants. But when they were cut down, things fell apart. Not magically, but there was a very pragmatic component to grandmother's spiritual teaching. It was that trees are on our side when we are on their side. Somehow, way before science, way before history was ever written down, before anyone was so enlightened that they could ignore religious myths and stories, these ancient people knew the coded wisdom, the wisdom that was literally encoded in the world on page 1 of the Bible. They knew it. Age-old Kenyans knew that their trees were a keystone to their health and their protection and their love. Ancient Hebrews had the same kind of wisdom, that God's full creation is beautiful and trees are right there in the center of the first page, the center of the last page, the center of this psalm. Nothing magical there, but it sounds spiritual to me. Creation works together, and we are all called to care for our earth, as it is called to care for us. We are in this together, all of us. And most importantly, we are in this together with God. And may it be so. Amen.